Sony just made PS Plus way more expensive. Alright, so this is the newest episode of PlayStation News. If you guys have been here before, you know how this works. We've got 5 news stories that are the biggest around the world of PlayStation. So in this week's episode, we're starting out with the PS Now games for May. We're talking about the huge acquisition Embracer Group just made. There's a new division over at PlayStation that I'm really happy about, and my most anticipated game just got a huge leak. Alright, so we're quickly approaching the merger of PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus into the 3-tiered PlayStation Plus structure that'll be happening in June, but until then, we are still getting new downloadable games on PlayStation Now. Now I gotta say, after the past few months where Sony has been absolutely killing it with the free games that have been available on PlayStation Now, this one is a little light. As far as AAA games goes, there's nothing I'm really interested in, but there is an awesome indie game that's included that I think everyone should at least give a shot, especially if you're a new Souls fan after spending hours and hours in Elden Ring. So first up, you have Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. Gotta be honest, I'm not the biggest anime or Naruto fan, but I'm sure if you're into this stuff, that one's going to be good for you. You've also got Soulcalibur IV, so if you're a fighting game fan, that one should be pretty good. And then the indie game I was talking about is Blasphemous. It's a pixelated 2D style game that's set up a lot like Dark Souls. It is super brutal. It starts out with your character taking a helmet that has a bunch of spikes on the inside, putting it on his head, and then you watch blood flow from the eyes and underneath the mask. And that is possibly the least brutal part of the game. Like the bosses, the enemies, the combat, it is super dark, super gory. I love it. I think it's one of the best games I've played, especially on the indie side of things. So if you've never tried it out before, you should definitely download it on PlayStation Now. I'm filming this video on May 3rd, so all of these games are available to download now. So if you're just coming off of Elden Ring and you don't really have anything to play, again, I cannot recommend Blasphemous enough. I played it back in the Nintendo Switch, and I think I'm gonna have to give it another shot on PlayStation because it'll look really good blown up on my TV. And if you're looking to subscribe to PlayStation Now, I have it linked down in the description so you can get to it super easy. And if you've got a little bit of wear and tear on your controller after playing Elden Ring and now Blasphemous, you can go check out the links in the description because I've got every DualSense down there. Next up, let's talk about Square Enix and the fact that they just sold some of their biggest and best studios and IP for way less money than I personally think they're worth. So earlier this week, pretty late in the night, Embracer Group announced that they had just bought a ton of studios and IP from Square Enix for around $300 million. And from there, the news just kept getting better for Embracer Group and worse for Square Enix. So the studios they were able to pick up are basically all of Square Enix's Western studios: Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal. And some of the biggest and most noteworthy IP that was included in this deal was Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Legacy of Kain. The list goes on and on. And what I meant by the news just kept getting worse for Square Enix, other than the fact that they undervalued these companies by a lot of money, is the fact that they sold all of them so they can investigate the blockchain and make more metaverse type stuff. You know, all the things that people don't really care about or want in gaming. Square Enix is going in that direction, and Embracer Group is taking over a bunch of dormant IP that no matter how many millions of copies they sell, Square Enix just comes out and says they're disappointing. Like, we got this slideshow that showed off all of the combined sales of all these franchises like Tomb Raider and Deus Ex, and it's crazy to think that Square Enix could have considered any of these a failure. So across its massive franchise, Tomb Raider has had 88 million franchise sales, which is nuts, and Deus Ex, which has many less games in its catalog, has 12 million plus AAA lifetime sales, which is really good for an immersive sim. Now for me personally, this is super exciting news because Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided are 2 of my favorite games ever. They really introduced me to the immersive sim genre before I played Dishonored, and if you've ever played Mankind Divided, you know that that game had a really good story up until its ending, which is a massive cliffhanger. Now the rumors over the years were that Square Enix made Eidos end it on a cliffhanger so they can make another game instead of just finishing this one. That has been proven false over the years, but it was a huge mistake to end the game on a cliffhanger because it didn't have enough sales in Square Enix's eyes, and we haven't gotten a follow-up, and I really want to know what happens in that story. So hopefully Embracer Group makes a new Deus Ex game with Eidos because I really want to see it, and they're stupid not to. It's an incredible franchise. Tomb Raider, on the other hand, is another franchise that I think is hilarious. Square Enix sees as an underperformer. It's nuts to me that Crystal Dynamics was able to reboot this franchise, get it to that many sales, only to be called a failure by their parent company. I think it's good that the next Tomb Raider game is finally just being called Tomb Raider. We've got the same Lara Croft, it looks like, from the reboot trilogy, but she's now just the Tomb Raider. She's not becoming the Tomb Raider, so they're really in a good spot to make a brand new game, and I think it's going to play really well on Unreal Engine 5. The one thing I'm curious about though is the Marvel IP. We all know Avengers is basically an embarrassing mess, so I don't really care so much about that. But Eidos made Guardians of the Galaxy, and as far as superhero games go, it's probably my favorite of the past few years, and honestly, it's at the top of my list of pretty much every game that came out last year. Super underrated game, once again called a disappointment by Square. I'd love to see a sequel to that, or maybe some DLC, so I'm really curious if that IP was able to travel over to Embracer Group with this purchase, or if it's still stuck at Square Enix. I don't really know what Square Enix would do with the Guardians IP, or even the Avengers one with their Japanese studios, but hey, anything's possible, I guess, right? Like, Eidos could go over to Marvel and be like, look, we'll make another Guardians of the Galaxy game, we got this Embracer Group funding, it'll come out a lot less buggy and be a lot better received, and Marvel will probably be like, yeah, you guys got great reviews and the word of mouth on this game is amazing. And finally, I think it's good that these studios sold to a third-party publisher versus Sony or Microsoft. There's a lot of IP, a lot of studios that come along with this, and it would be really messy for Sony to pick up Crystal Dynamics right now, knowing that they're still working on the perfect Dark game for Microsoft. They've got a lot of baggage, they need a reset to make some good games, and Sony doesn't need that baggage right now. So yeah, I think it's good that Embracer Group is taking them under their wing, get these games out, get them back in shape, and then we'll have more third-party games to look forward to in the future. Next up, let's talk about Sony and games preservation. So I think it's fair to say they have made some big strides in the past few months from where they were last year, when we were hearing a bunch of reports that they don't care about indie games, they're basically pay to play on the PlayStation Store, and they don't care about backwards compatibility or game preservation. Now they have a whole division at Sony that's basically focused on game preservation. So all these games that we're going to be seeing coming to PlayStation Plus Premium, like the PS1 games, the PS2 games, PS3 games hopefully in the future, PSP games, PS Vita games maybe in the future, all of those games shouldn't be left to die when their stores shut down. But that's kind of what we've seen happen in the past, right? There are a ton of examples of games that have gone back to get remasters, like the DLC for the first Mass Effect, and the source code is just completely gone. So that DLC never made it over to the Legendary Collection because they just didn't have the source code. Back when Konami put out the HD collection of Silent Hill 2 and 3, people were absolutely shocked at how bad those ports were, and it turned out to be because Konami lost the source code for both of those games, so they had to use unfinished builds for the HD collections, and they left a bunch of unfinished stuff in both of those games that actually made them look and run worse than they originally did on the PlayStation 2 back in the day. So now internally at Sony, there's a whole division that's basically built to stop this, which is good because in the future, like 2 console generations down the line, we're going to want to go back and play PS4 games maybe, or PS3 games, and knowing that Sony was being proactive and making sure these games are taken care of so that we can play them in the future, that's just a good thing overall, and I'm glad to see it. There's so many more examples than the ones I've talked about, specifically looking at you, Nintendo, where they just don't care about game preservation. There's a lot of rumors out there that specifically on the Nintendo Switch, with Nintendo Switch Online, when you get these downloadable games from the past, like for the NES and SNES, Nintendo is just going to ROM sites, downloading the ROMs and repackaging them to run on their in-house emulator, and then charging us monthly for them to play them on our Switch. Now, Sony could definitely do the same thing with PSP because of how wide open that console was cracked, and yeah, PSP emulators run great these days, but hopefully in the future they actually use their own source code to make these ROMs that we're paying for instead of just going to the internet and getting ones that were dumped from other people's consoles and discs. After that, we got to talk about more leaks surrounding Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order 2, which is supposedly getting revealed at the end of this month at Star Wars Celebration. I absolutely cannot wait. That is one of my favorite games of all time, the first one I'm talking about. I have played it so many times. I'm kind of at the point where I've just done everything in that game and I need a sequel to it. So what we've heard from Jeff Grubb on his Grubb Snacks podcast is that unfortunately, while initially we had heard that this could come out later this year, it has been officially pushed to 2023. I'm fine with that. The first game was incredibly buggy when it came out, no matter what console you played it on. The frame rates were all over the place. Like the performance mode never ran at 60 frames per second and the quality mode never really ran at 30. So I'd rather them take the time to just get this game finished, polished, running as well as it does on next gen consoles right out of the gate instead of over a year after the game launches. The other thing we're learning, which is really good in my opinion, is that this one is ditching the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. This is going to be a next gen and PC only title. I know some people are going to be upset about that because of how hard it is to get a next gen console right now, but guys, we're a year and a half into this console generation. We got to start cutting the cord at some point, and I'm just being honest, as someone who has a PS5, I'm glad that we're starting to see it with a Star Wars game. It really does feel like God of War Ragnarok is going to be the beginning of the end end for the PlayStation 4, and I'm fine with that. And the last big thing, which I'm kind of thankful for that we're hearing, is that they're dropping Fallen Order from the title, so it's just going to be called like Star Wars Jedi 2. I think that's good because the way you write this out, right, like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, it was never really that great of a title, and it didn't really make a lot of sense for what the game was about. Like, yeah, the Jedi Order fell after episode 3, but you could call literally any game set after episode 3 Fallen Order. It just felt like an unnecessary subtitle, so I'm glad we're just gonna go with Star Wars Jedi 2. Maybe they'll have a subtitle after that, but I think they're good just calling it Star Wars Jedi 2. Going back to the release date, when Grubb says it's pushed to 2023, I hope this is like a summer 2023 game. I like when Star Wars games come out around Christmas. I just don't want to have to wait that long for this game because I feel like we've been waiting forever. And the way that game ends, no spoilers, it really just opens up so many possibilities for this new group of characters that somehow Respawn created that are incredible, and I want to see more from their story. I'm just personally really happy about where the Star Wars franchise is as a whole with gaming right now. We've got the KOTOR remake coming out sooner rather than later. We've got EA still working on their better Star Wars games. Apparently there's a first-person shooter coming from Respawn down the line. We've got, of course, Eclipse to look forward to in a few years, and on top of that, there's apparently a bunch more rumored games that we're still waiting to hear about. So yeah, it feels like when I was a kid and on Xbox I had so many Star Wars games that I couldn't possibly play them all. We're finally getting back to that point and it feels great. And the last story I have for you guys today is about PlayStation Plus Premium, and unfortunately Sony has become wise to the greatest hack of the century. Well, that's a little bit blowing it out of proportion, but it was a cool hack that I know a lot of people were taking advantage of because when Sony announced this, someone tweeted at me that it was my fault they got rid of it. But guys, the timing does not line up at all. I will not take credit for this cancellation. So if you guys haven't heard about this one, basically what you could do is if you already had a PlayStation Plus subscription, you could go to the store and buy subscriptions to PlayStation Now for like $59.99 a year and add them to your account. And the reason people were doing this is because if when PlayStation Plus rolls over in June, you have PlayStation Plus already, and on top of that you have PlayStation Now, it becomes PlayStation Plus Premium. So the way the math was working out, you were paying $60 a year for PlayStation Plus Premium instead of $120 a year. So people were taking advantage of a stacking feature where you could add as many years of PlayStation Now to your account as you wanted, and as long as you had both Plus and Now when the rollover happened, it would proactively give you as many years as you had stacked of PlayStation Now for Premium. And Sony acknowledged this, they said it was fine, but unfortunately they just got rid of the stacking ability. Now thankfully this was an active deal for a very long time. It feels like we've been able to do this for about 3 weeks, maybe even a month at this point. So hopefully if you planned on getting PlayStation Plus Premium in the future, you already stacked this deal, but if you didn't, you're like me, you're probably just waiting and seeing how good PlayStation Plus Premium is. I know you kind of need PlayStation Plus, but they're giving us 3 tiers here, and I'm gonna choose which one I subscribe to based on the games that Sony makes available, right? Like, I don't really care too much about streaming PS3 games. I'll just emulate them at this point because I don't like streaming. I also want to see this library of games that Sony is going to make available because I play a lot of video games, and I could totally see a lot of the stuff that's being included being older games that I've already played. So for me, there's no real reason to subscribe to a $120 a year service if I'm not going to fully take advantage of it. That's just me though. But with that being said, I can tell you right now that if they do ever make PS3 emulation available on the PlayStation 5, I will be upgrading to PlayStation Plus Premium because those are the games that I really want to play. I miss the Infamous series, I miss the Resistance series, I really want to play Metal Gear Solid 4 again, and right now the only way to do that is to emulate them on my Steam Deck, which is crazy when you consider that the PlayStation 5 is apparently having trouble running these games. But until then, if you're one of the people out there who really wants PlayStation Plus Premium, you really want to throw your money at Sony, hopefully you took advantage of the stacking feature before they took it away.